Hello and welcome. Today's painting is this wistful, calm, atmospheric study in blue with a beautiful blue heron. Starting off today with my pre-drawn outline, you can see I've just sketched out the heron detail and a couple of spits of land. The colours that I'm using today are just up on screen there. I'll pop a list down below as well. I'll also pop a link to my Patreon page where I will be uploading this outline for download if anybody would like to have a go at painting this scene. To begin with, as you can see, I'm wetting the top 2/3 of the paper, beginning as is usual with me by putting in our lovely blue sky. Want to get that top of the paper lovely and wet, let the water soak in for a moment before you add the paint. So I'm having a little bit of fun today, spattering on this lovely pink colour just to get a little bit of liveliness into our sky. Just trying a different method today. I know it looks a little bit wild, but do bear with me. This is ultramarine pink and now sweeping on ultramarine blue around it. You can see how wet the paper is with how quickly that pink is dispersing and running down the paper. Just doing some really nice quick sweeps of the blue ultramarine here, just to get that colour set into this part of the paper. Just moving it all around a little bit. You can see with how wet the paper is as well, I'm able to move the colour around with my brush. I wanted the blue to really stand out here, so I'm adding in a little bit more colour quickly whilst the paper is still nice and wet. Now I'm just splattering in a little bit more pink and a little bit of indigo here, a little bit of indigo colour to deepen the sky a little bit. And there we are, there's some more pink just to get a little bit more variation in shade up in that top corner. Just going to use my fan brush to just move this around. The paint that I've spattered on is, as you can see, very loose, it's very wet as well, and it's just diffusing nicely into the blue that's already there. Just using the fan brush to encourage a little bit of movement. You can see that as I'm using ultramarine, we're getting this lovely sense of granulation along the top as well. I think you can see along the top and middle part, particularly on the left, where it's just all sort of granulating beautifully into the texture of the watercolour paper. I'm using hot press paper, cold press paper, hence the lovely texture. And now just sweeping in a little extra blue colour, a little bit of indigo along the top and sides there, just to really emphasise that blue. So going to leave the sky for now. I want it to sit there and for the paint to move around of its own accord and diffuse a little bit with that water that's still there. And so now I'm just sweeping my brush with basically some bluish paint water, and you can see I'm taking up a little bit of indigo from the side there that's spilled down and starting to introduce that into the bottom part of the painting. I want to keep this quite light but still reflective of the sky colours above, so I'm using some really loose light paint. This is the indigo again that I'm just putting on my brush here with lots and lots of water. And now you can see I'm just bringing my brush down and I'm creating reflections here from this spit of land that I've sketched in. This is just basically a rough guide. I will probably go over this later, but this is for my own personal reference, and reminding myself that there's a reflection here that needs to be taken care of once we're putting in all the details. We've got this lovely little bit of land coming in here from the left with, of course, our handsome heron perched there. It's interesting using this big old flat brush to get a little bit of texture in there, get a little bit of texture on the water, the sense of movement, these sort of dainty sort of flat ripples that you get quite often on a still lake that still has like a little breeze blowing over it. That's the kind of effect we're trying to get. You can see I'm introducing a bit of ultramarine blue in here now, just to encourage that reflection on the from the sky onto the waters of the lake. Just moving the paint and the water around a little bit, try and get a little bit of that nice watery detail. So here we are. This is it dry. It's been sitting for a good hour or so, drying naturally. You can always, of course, dry with a hairdryer, but if you do that, it tends to inhibit the diffusion of the paint. So if you want something to look really, really soft and diffused and to just get as much blending and softening as possible, I would advise leaving it to dry naturally, which is what I've done here. You can see that sky is lovely and soft. We've got that paler area in the top right corner, that gleam of pink and light coming through, really lovely and soft. So now all I'm doing is emphasizing that by putting in this distant little bit of land. I'm using again some quite dilute paint here. This is a mixture of my ultramarine blue and the ultramarine pink, which I'm just spreading carefully on here with my 1-inch flat brush, just to get a nice soft distant bit of land here. I'm not putting the colour on too harshly and too strongly, because like I said, I want this to be a piece of land that appears in the distance, in the background, so it needs to be paler in colour than the others. And now I'm just using a texture brush to introduce a little bit of shape and a little bit of movement and texture into this piece of land. We don't need it to be too highly detailed, seeing as it is going to be in the distance, but you can see I'm just sweeping the brush along and around, moving the paint a little bit, and also getting some texture and some movement into that top line, giving the impression of it being covered in foliage, trees, plants, grasses, bushes and shrubs, rather than just straight along in sort of harsh lines. And speaking of trees, here is our first one. This is a really, really simple way of doing an evergreen tree, so sort of a pine tree or a fir tree, something with the sort of classic, very straight, sticky-outy branches. You just do one vertical line for the trunk, and then using a small brush to just sweep along horizontally, doing shorter strokes at the top and longer ones at the bottom, so you get that classic sort of slightly triangular and angular shape. So here we go. I'm just going to do this one again here to see how quickly and easily you can just pop these trees in, and especially using this loose paint, giving this impression of distance. This I think is a really lovely and simple effect for sort of distant pine trees. Fan brush is a great tool for this sort of work. Just use it really loosely and really lightly, and it will give you these lovely sort of horizontal strokes which don't look too sort of severe and planned. Because of the extra bristles, it sort of looks lovely and loose. Now again, just using my foliage brush to add in a few extra details here. This little patch here that I've just put in is going to be some kind of shrub of sorts, just poking up from the top of the rise there. Now you can see here I'm adding in a little bit of extra ultramarine as texture on this side here, which in all honesty I end up taking out in a moment, so ignore this part. I was trying to give the impression of another sort of extra little spit of land coming down diagonally from the left, but in the end decided that I wanted it to look like misty and distant, and like the mist was rising off the lake, so I ended up getting rid of this. You can see here, just using my liner brush to introduce even more texture along this far bank, bringing in some grasses, and you can see on that little clump there that I created with the texture brush for some bushes, I've just put a few extra lines in there to just give it some texture and some detail. So we've got a tangle of branches as well as some leaves. And this is where you can see I've taken out that sweep of blue there. I've got my brush, it's got clean water without paint. You can see I'm drying it off, and I'm just sweeping out that extra paint there, which you can do whilst it's still wet. Like I said, with a nice soft brush and some clean water, just sweep it out, try and be as neat as possible. But you can see there I've managed to take out all that dark paint, and it looks lovely and misty now along that line, so quite happy with that there. It's a lovely thing about watercolour, sometimes it can be very forgiving of mistakes, which I'm very grateful for. But I think that's turned out okay. So now you can see I'm putting in this second spit of land using exactly the same technique as before. The observant among you will notice a third tree has popped up as if by the magic of editing. Again, using exactly the same technique as before, just using the liner brush, just popping an extra one in there, following the rule of odds, which tells us that an odd number of things is generally more pleasing to the eye to look at than an even number of things. This is quite a generic art rule, and of course rules are made to be broken. However, this is one that I do tend to enjoy. So we've got our 3 trees, we've got our 3 little spits of land here, and of course we've got our 1 singular heron. You can see I'm using a darker colour for this second bank. That's because it's further towards the foreground, a little bit closer to us, the viewer, our imaginary camera, if this were a photograph. So doing it in a darker colour, using the ultramarine blue mixed with a touch of indigo to really give it that depth and that richness. But again, brush-wise, just using exactly the same technique, texture brush to give it some interest, and you can see here I'm just using my liner brush to introduce some little grassy, reedy patterns. Introducing some more of the ultramarine pink here. That's such a lovely bright colour, It's almost like a colour I'd associate with heather. That sort of lovely, rich, sort of dusty pink. It's not too bright, you know. It's not sort of like a violent, like, oh my god, that's really pink. Maybe that's just me. I just think it's such a lovely colour. As part of the ultramarine family, of course, it works so well with the blues here. I think it lends this painting a really lovely, sort of wistful, almost magical feel. As you can see, putting in this final spit of land, this is right in the foreground, so I'm using some richer, darker paint, painting this in more darkly than the other ones, using my little 1-inch flat brush to get a little bit of texture in this land, and just fill in, following my pencil line there, and just start filling in with my colours. I don't need it to be too detailed. Most of the detail is focused on this piece on our beautiful heron, which we're going to fill in last. So this part needs to just have some lovely rich colour and a little bit of texture, which sort of leads the eye and gives the impression of detail without having to without having to be too detailed. You know, going easy on the poor artist here. As you can see, I'm using the shape of this little flat brush to introduce lots of texture using indigo. And then just bringing in that extra rich ultramarine colour and just moving it around. This nice wet paint gives you the opportunity to move this paint around a little bit and really get it where you want it. You can see as I'm dabbing on with the texture brush, you can see it's leaving these impressions which are then almost immediately softening down because of the wetness of the paint, which is really nice. It means that we don't have any lines that are too harsh. It also means I'm able to pull some of this paint down and just emphasising the reflection here of this bit of land. Again, going back to our large flat wash brush. This is a De La Rowney Aquafine 2-inch synthetic Skyflow wash brush, and it's brilliant. And you can see here how simple it was to just pull those reflections down using straight strokes, and coupled with a little bit of wiggle there to just give the impression again of the movement and the ripple of water, before coming in here again with the texture brush and layering up a little bit of extra ultramarine pink and ultramarine blue down at the bottom here and along the top to give the impression of some lovely sort of flowering shrub, some heather perhaps coming over this lovely hill. I'll leave it up to your imaginations. You can see now, just popping this extra little bit of texture in. This part of the painting is dry now and you can see the difference. You can see how the impressions of the bristles of the brush are staying there a lot more clearly, a lot more sharply than they were a minute ago. That's because I took the painting away and I hair dried that part so it would dry nice and quickly, but also so I could get this contrasting sharper texture, which we want here because this is the foreground, so we need a few sharp textures so that our heron doesn't look too strange against all the softness. So here I'm just using my liner brush to introduce again some textures. These are some lovely grasses or reeds poking up from the lake. I'm just going to build them up around our heron to just sort of cement him a little bit into the landscape, and just to give a little bit of extra detail here. Trying to keep them quite small and quite fine. The tendency, of course, is to go wild with the reeds and the grasses and do some really lovely, beautiful, long, elegant ones because they're such fun to do. But again, the size of the heron here, we don't want to overpower him or overpower the scene. So just putting in a few careful reeds here is a nice way to give some detail without distracting too much from the focal point, which will be the heron. So now I am filling in my heron silhouette that I drew in pencil so long ago. And I'm starting with some quite light paint here, mixed quite heavily with water. This is basically the same, so mix of the three colours I've been using, just got them on my palette and mixed up a whole bunch of water. And now I'm using my fine detail brush to fill in this silhouette very carefully. You see, just starting at the top and bringing the colour down the rest of the bird's body. And again, whilst the paint is still wet here, I will be able to add in a little bit of extra detail, which is why I'm concentrating at the moment and just getting the shape right and getting everything filled in. And now I'm beginning to add some darks just to give a little bit of definition. We want dark over the shoulder and the wing of our blue heron. They have naturally, that's where they have darker plumage, lovely, rich, almost navy blue colour. Hence the name, I suppose, the blue heron. So you can see I'm building that up there, across the wing, across the bird's shoulder, and just across the top of the head and bill as well. So this isn't too highly detailed a painting, this is still our bird in silhouette, but it helps to, rather than just to have one sort of block of colour, we would want a little bit of detail, a little bit of shading, give the impression of life on this bird, that give the general impression of shape, of three-dimensionality, rather than just being a sort of single colour silhouette. So you can see I'm bringing in a little bit of extra indigo across the shoulder there and just letting it diffuse down into the wing. And just for the finishing touch, don't forget his little legs, like stilts popping down there, and just putting in an extra couple of grasses around his feet, really embedding him into the landscape. So now that our heron is done, this is my sort of finishing touch, so to speak, popping a few distant birds in along the tree line there. I can never resist some distant birds. So again, I'm using back to using a really light mixture of water and paint, quite heavy on the water. So as you can see, these birds are going on really light, they're not sort of standing out too harshly against that misty background. It's like we're seeing them through the mist that's rising off our beautiful lake. I don't need too many. I tell myself every time. And yet here I go. Now, of course, this is entirely an optional step. You can leave your sky clear if you so wish. But here we are with the finished painting. I've taken the tape off. I think you can all agree with me that this is certainly is a study in blue. The ultramarine indigo and ultramarine paint worked really well together here. I'm really thrilled with how this one turned out. I love our handsome heron there waiting for his breakfast, perhaps. Love the misty sky. That hint of pink in there lends it a really soft, sort of wistful and magical tone, I think. But what do you think? I'd love to hear from you down in the comments. Let me know what you think. Feel free to try this one out with any sort of triple colour combination of your choice. You don't have to use blues. This would look equally as lovely in sort of soft greens or soft sort of red pink tones. Anyway, that's me getting carried away. Thank you everybody so much for watching. Please leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. We'd love to have you. Please consider checking out my page on Patreon as well for extra videos and all that sort of bits and bobs. And I look forward to seeing you all again in the next video.